The sticky, golden substance dripped from Madison Chun's dark hair onto her worn sneakers, creating small puddles on the cafeteria floor. She stood motionless as three figures loomed over her, their laughter echoing off the walls of Lincoln Valley. High's nearly empty dining hall. The honey wasn't just messy, it was calculated humiliation, designed to break her spirit in the most degrading way possible. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. But what Tyler Brooks, Jessica Martinez, and Connor Walsh didn't know was that the quiet girl they'd been tormenting for months had been preparing for this moment her entire life. And in exactly 4 minutes, when the afternoon bell rang and students flooded the hallways, their reign of terror would end in a way none of them could have imagined. Madison Chun had never wanted to be noticed. From her first day at Lincoln Valley High 3 years ago, she'd perfected the art of invisibility. She chose seats in the back corners of classrooms, ate lunch alone with a book propped against her water bottle, and walked the halls with her backpack clutched tightly too. Her chest like armor. Her clothes were simple faded jeans, plain t-shirts, and a gray hoodie that had seen better days. She wore her straight black hair long, often letting it fall forward to create a curtain between herself and the world. Teachers knew her as the student who turned in perfect assignments, but never raised her hand. Her grades were exceptional, particularly in mathematics and science, but she never volunteered answers or participated in group discussions. When forced to speak, her voice was barely above a whisper, causing classmates to lean forward and strain to hear her responses. This quiet demeanor wasn't shyness in the traditional sense. It was a carefully constructed shield. Madison's family had moved to Lincoln Valley from San Francisco when her father, David Chun, took a position as head of security for a local manufacturing plant. Her mother, Sarah, worked as a pediatric nurse at the county hospital. They lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment on the east side of town, where rent was affordable and neighbors minded their own business. The Chuns kept to themselves, partly due to their busy work schedules, and partly because they understood their daughter's preference for privacy. What her classmates didn't see was Madison's other life, the one that began every Tuesday and Thursday at 4:30 in the afternoon and every Saturday morning at 9. 3 times a week, she would slip out of her school clothes and into a worn GI, tying her belt with practiced precision. Master Rodriguez's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Academy occupied the 2nd floor of a converted warehouse downtown, accessible only by a narrow staircase that creaked with each step. Madison had been training there since she was 11, when her father first brought her after a particularly difficult transition period following their move. He'd noticed her withdrawal, her reluctance to make friends, and her growing anxiety about starting over in a new place. Rather than pushing her into social activities that made her uncomfortable, he'd suggested martial arts as a way to build confidence and discipline. Master Elena Rodriguez was a former competitor who had opened her school after retiring from professional fighting. She was small in stature but commanded respect through her knowledge and no-nonsense teaching style. Her academy wasn't like the flashy martial arts studios that advertised in strip malls. There were no bright lights, no mirrors covering every wall, no promises of quick results. The training space was functional blue mats covering most of the floor, a few heavy bags hanging in one corner, and motivational quotes written in both English and Portuguese on the walls. From her first class, Madison found something she'd never experienced before, a place where being quiet was acceptable, where speaking came through actions rather than words, where size and volume mattered less than technique and patience. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu rewarded thinking over aggression, strategy over brute force. It was often called human chess, and Madison's analytical mind took to it naturally. Master Rodriguez recognized Madison's potential early on. While other students might learn a technique and apply it with raw enthusiasm, Madison would practice the same movement dozens of times, analyzing each component, understanding not just how it worked but why it worked. She studied the leverage points, the weight distribution, the timing required for maximum effectiveness. Her progress was methodical and steady. By her second year of training, Madison was regularly sparring with students who had been there longer. Her natural flexibility and problem-solving skills made her particularly effective at escaping difficult positions and finding opportunities where others saw only disadvantages. She wasn't the strongest student, nor the most athletic, but she was becoming one of the most technical. Master Rodriguez often used Madison as an example during classes, not because she was flashy or dominant, but because her movements were clean and purposeful. "Watch how she doesn't waste energy," the instructor would say as Madison worked out of a seemingly impossible position. "She's not fighting the submission, she's solving it." The mental aspects of Jiu-Jitsu appealed to Madison as much as the physical techniques. The art taught patience, the ability to remain calm under pressure, and the importance of thinking several moves ahead. These lessons extended beyond the mats. When faced with difficult situations at school or stress at home, Madison would draw on the breathing techniques and mental composure she developed during training. Her parents noticed the changes. While Madison remained quiet and introspective, she carried herself differently. Her posture improved. She seemed more confident in her own skin, less affected by the opinions and actions of others. When her mother asked about her training, Madison would share basic details, but kept the deeper aspects of her development private. This wasn't secretiveness, it was simply Madison's nature to process experiences internally before sharing them with others. At school, however, this growth remained invisible to her classmates. Madison continued to blend into the background, choosing isolation over the complications that came with social interaction. She'd witnessed enough high school drama to know that visibility often led to problems she preferred to avoid. Her strategy worked well for the first 2.5 years at Lincoln Valley High. But Tyler Brooks had a different perspective on quiet students. Tyler was everything Madison wasn't: loud, attention-seeking, and determined to be the center of every social interaction. He stood over 6 feet tall with an athletic build earned through years of playing varsity football. His blonde hair was always perfectly styled, and he wore the latest trends in clothing and shoes. Tyler's family owned a successful car dealership in town, providing him with both financial resources and social status. More importantly, Tyler thrived on control. He enjoyed being the person others looked to for entertainment, for approval, for leadership. His humor often came at someone else's expense, and he had a talent for identifying people who wouldn't or couldn't fight back. Teachers saw him as charismatic and confident. Students saw him as someone whose approval mattered and whose disapproval could make school life miserable. Jessica Martinez had been Tyler's girlfriend for almost 2 years. She was petite with carefully maintained blonde highlights and a wardrobe that showcased her family's wealth. Jessica's father was a prominent attorney, and her mother served on several community boards. Jessica had learned early in life that appearance and reputation were everything, and she worked hard to maintain both. Her relationship with Tyler gave her additional social currency, but it also meant supporting his activities even when they made her uncomfortable. Jessica had witnessed Tyler's treatment of other students and had occasionally felt guilty about her passive participation. However, challenging Tyler's behavior would risk her own social standing, something she wasn't prepared to do. Connor Walsh completed their trio. He was Tyler's best friend since elementary school and served as both sidekick and enabler. Connor was shorter than Tyler but shared his athletic build and aggressive personality. His family owned a construction company, and Connor often talked about joining the business after graduation. He looked up to Tyler and desperately wanted his approval, which meant participating in whatever schemes Tyler devised. The three had been inseparable since middle school. Moving through Lincoln Valley, high like a small storm system that others learned to avoid. They weren't violent bullies in the traditional sense. They were sophisticated in their cruelty, using social dynamics and psychological pressure to maintain their status while making others miserable. Madison first appeared on their radar during junior year, though she didn't realize it at the time. Tyler noticed her during lunch periods, always sitting alone with a book, seemingly uninterested in the social hierarchies that governed high school life. Her indifference bothered him. Everyone else at Lincoln Valley High either sought his approval or clearly feared his disapproval. Madison appeared to have no opinion about him at all. This neutrality was intolerable to Tyler. He began with small tests, walking past her table and making comments just loud enough for her to hear, having Jessica accidentally bump into her in hallways, getting Connor to ask her obviously mocking questions during class discussions. Madison's response was always the same. She would acknowledge what happened with a brief glance and then continue with whatever she was doing. Her lack of reaction frustrated Tyler but also intrigued him. Most students would either engage with his behavior, fighting back, or trying to appease him, or they would show clear signs of distress that satisfied his need for control. Madison did neither. She simply existed in her own space, apparently unaffected by his presence. As junior year progressed into senior year, Tyler's attention toward Madison intensified. He began researching her background, trying to understand why she was so different from other students. He learned about her family's work schedules, her academic performance, and her general routine. What he couldn't discover was anything about her life outside school, which made her even more mysterious and frustrating. The escalation began with small incidents. Tyler would have Connor accidentally knock Madison's books from her hands as she walked between classes. Jessica would make snide comments about Madison's clothes or appearance when passing her in hallways. Tyler himself would position his group near Madison during lunch, speaking loudly about topics designed to make her uncomfortable. Through it all, Madison maintained her composure. She would pick up her books without complaint, ignore the comments about her appearance, and continue reading during lunch regardless of nearby conversations. Her calm responses only amplified Tyler's frustration and determination to get a reaction. The honey incident had been planned for weeks. Tyler knew Madison's schedule well enough to predict when she would be alone in the cafeteria. He'd chosen honey specifically because it would be difficult to clean, would smell sweet and sticky for hours, and would be humiliating without being technically violent. He convinced Jessica and Connor to participate by framing it as a harmless prank that would finally get Madison to show some emotion. They waited until the lunch period was nearly over, when most students had already left for their next classes. Madison sat at her usual table in the far corner, reading a chemistry textbook while eating a sandwich her mother had packed that morning. She was absorbed in a chapter about molecular bonds and didn't notice the three figures approaching from behind. Tyler carried a large squeeze bottle filled with honey he'd taken from the cafeteria's condiment station. Jessica had suggested adding food coloring to make it more visible, but Tyler wanted the natural golden color that would catch the light and photograph well for social media documentation. Connor was responsible for recording the incident on his phone, though he felt increasingly uncomfortable about the plan as the moment approached. Madison sensed their presence a moment before Tyler acted. Her peripheral vision caught movement, and she began to turn her head just as the honey began to pour. The thick, sticky substance hit her hair first, running down the sides of her face and dripping onto her chemistry book. Tyler squeezed the entire bottle, ensuring thorough coverage while Jessica and Connor watched in fascination and growing horror. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The honey was warm from sitting near the cafeteria's heating lamps, which made it flow easily but also made the experience more unpleasant. It soaked through Madison's hair to her scalp, ran down the back of her neck and under her collar, and pooled on the table around her book and sandwich. The sweet smell was overwhelming in its intensity. For a moment, the cafeteria was completely silent except for the sound of honey dripping onto the floor. Tyler, Jessica, and Connor waited for Madison's reaction: tears, anger, shouting, something that would validate their actions and provide the satisfaction Tyler had been seeking for months. Instead, Madison slowly closed her chemistry book, honey still dripping from her hair. She turned to face them with the same calm expression she'd maintained throughout their previous encounters. Her dark eyes moved from Tyler to Jessica to Connor, taking in their faces and their body language with the analytical approach she'd learned on the mats. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. She didn't run away or call for help. She simply stood up, honey dripping steadily from her hair and clothes, and walked toward the cafeteria's exit. Tyler called after her with mocking comments about her appearance, but Madison didn't acknowledge him. Jessica giggled nervously, though she was beginning to feel sick about what they'd done. Connor stopped recording and put his phone away, already regretting his participation. As Madison walked through the cafeteria doors, she passed a small group of students who had witnessed the incident from across the room. They stared in shock at her honey-covered appearance and the three perpetrators who were now laughing and high-fiving each other near her abandoned table. Word of the honey incident spread quickly through Lincoln Valley High. By the end of the school day, most students had heard about what Tyler, Jessica, and Connor had done to the quiet girl who kept to herself. Some found it funny, others thought it was cruel, but everyone agreed that Madison's lack of reaction had been unexpected and somehow unsettling. Madison spent the rest of the afternoon in the nurse's office, where Mrs. Patterson helped her clean the honey from her hair and provided her with a spare shirt from the lost and found. The nurse had seen enough bullying incidents to recognize the signs, and she filed a report with the administration while offering Madison support and resources. But Madison declined most of the help offered to her. She thanked Mrs. Patterson for her practical assistance and assured her that she would handle the situation appropriately. When asked if she wanted to speak with the principal or have her parents contacted, Madison politely said she preferred to manage things herself. That afternoon, Madison left school as usual and drove to Master Rodriguez's academy for her regular Thursday training session. She arrived early, changed into her GI, and began warming up on the mats. When Master Rodriguez asked about the faint smell of honey that still lingered in her hair despite thorough washing, Madison simply said she'd had an interesting day at school. During sparring that evening, Madison's training partners noticed she was more focused than usual, more intense in her approach to each position and technique. She worked through scenarios with a systematic precision that impressed even the advanced students. Master Rodriguez observed her carefully, recognizing the signs of someone processing stress through physical training. After class, as Madison was preparing to leave, Master Rodriguez approached her quietly. The instructor had worked with teenagers for many years and understood when someone was dealing with difficulties beyond the academy walls. "You know," Master Rodriguez said, adjusting Madison's collar as she prepared to leave, "Jiu-Jitsu isn't just about what happens on the mats. It's about understanding yourself, understanding others, and knowing when to use what you've learned." Madison nodded, understanding the deeper meaning behind her instructor's words. She had been training for over 6 years, developing not just physical techniques, but mental discipline and emotional control. The incident with Tyler, Jessica, and Connor had been a test of sorts, though not one she had sought out or wanted. As she drove home that evening, Madison reflected on what had happened and what it might mean for her remaining months at Lincoln Valley High. She had maintained her composure during the honey incident, but she also understood that Tyler's frustration with her lack of reaction would likely lead to further escalation. Her passive approach to his bullying had protected her so far, but it had also made her a more attractive target. That night, Madison did something she rarely did. She spoke with her parents about school. Not in detail, and not with any request for intervention, but she mentioned that she might need to handle some social difficulties in the coming days. Her father, with his security background, understood the implications of her careful phrasing. Her mother offered support while respecting Madison's preference for independence. As Madison prepared for bed, she thought about the choice she would face if Tyler decided to escalate further. Her Jiu-Jitsu training had taught her that avoidance was often the best strategy, but it had also taught her that sometimes defensive action became necessary. The honey incident had been humiliating and unpleasant, but it hadn't crossed the line into physical violence. If Tyler crossed that line, Madison would need to make a decision that could change everything about her carefully maintained invisibility. At Lincoln Valley High, she hoped it wouldn't come to that. But she also knew that people like Tyler rarely stopped escalating until they faced consequences that made them reconsider their actions. The next morning, Madison arrived at school early and went directly to her first period class. She had washed her hair 3 times the previous evening, but she could still detect a faint sweet smell that reminded her of the cafeteria incident. Her chemistry book had been thoroughly cleaned and dried, though some pages remained slightly sticky despite her efforts. As students began arriving for the day, Madison noticed the looks and whispered conversations that followed her through the hallways. The story of the honey incident had clearly spread, and she was no longer invisible in the way she preferred. Some students looked at her with sympathy, others with curiosity, and a few with the kind of anticipation that suggested they expected further drama. Tyler, Jessica, and Connor arrived together as usual, clearly pleased with the attention their actions had generated. They moved through the halls with increased swagger, accepting congratulations from some classmates while ignoring disapproving looks from others. Tyler seemed particularly energized by the response, suggesting to Madison that her lack of reaction had achieved the opposite of what she'd hoped. The morning passed without incident, but Madison could feel the tension building towards something inevitable. Tyler's behavior during their shared classes was more provocative than usual. Louder comments, more obvious stares, deliberate positioning to block her path when moving around the classroom. He was testing her boundaries and building toward something bigger. During lunch, Madison chose a different table than usual, one closer to the center of the cafeteria where teachers would be more likely to notice any disturbances. She opened her chemistry book to the same chapter she'd been reading the previous day, trying to recapture her normal routine despite the changed circumstances. But routine was no longer possible. Tyler, Jessica, and Connor had established a new dynamic, and they were clearly planning to build on their previous success. As Madison read about molecular structures and chemical bonds, she was also mentally preparing for whatever form their next escalation might take. She didn't have long to wait. The second incident came exactly 1 week after the honey attack, during Madison's AP physics class. She was working quietly on a lab assignment when Tyler deliberately knocked over her beaker of solution, sending the liquid cascading across her notebook and lab papers. The teacher, Mr. Davidson, was helping another student and didn't witness the accident. Tyler offered a loud, sarcastic apology that drew snickers from his friends while Madison silently cleaned up the mess with paper towels. But something had shifted in Madison's demeanor that others were beginning to notice. Where she once might have kept her head down and avoided eye contact, she now watched Tyler and his friends with a steady, calculating gaze. Her movements remained controlled and economical, but there was a new quality to her stillness, the kind of quiet that preceded action rather than submission. Madison's chemistry teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, had been observing these changes with growing concern. She'd taught at Lincoln Valley High for 15 years and had developed an instinct for recognizing students under stress. Madison's academic performance remained excellent, but her body language had changed. She sat differently in her chair, positioned herself with better sightlines to classroom entrances, and seemed constantly aware of her surroundings in a way that suggested hypervigilance rather than simple attentiveness. During office hours one afternoon, Mrs. Rodriguez approached Madison about her observations. "You seem more tense lately," she said carefully. "Is everything all right at home?" Madison appreciated the teacher's concern, but deflected with characteristic diplomacy. "Just focused on maintaining my grades for college applications," she replied, which was technically true, even if it wasn't the complete truth. Mrs. Rodriguez accepted the explanation, but made a mental note to continue monitoring the situation. What Mrs. Rodriguez couldn't see was how Madison's training at Master Rodriguez's academy had intensified in response to the escalating situation at school. She arrived earlier for classes and stayed later, working on specific techniques that would be effective in confined spaces like school hallways. Her focus had shifted from general skill development to practical application scenarios. Master Rodriguez noticed the change immediately. Madison's sparring had become more aggressive, more decisive. She was working through positions with increased intensity, as if solving urgent problems rather than practicing theoretical techniques. During one particularly intense rolling session, she caught a brown belt in a triangle choke so quickly and efficiently that the experienced student was surprised by her speed and precision. "You're thinking about something specific," Master Rodriguez observed after class. "Your training has purpose beyond improvement." Madison nodded slowly. She'd been considering whether to discuss the school situation with her instructor, weighing the benefits of guidance against her preference for handling problems independently. "There's a situation at school that might require me to defend myself," she said finally. Master Rodriguez had heard similar statements from students before. Teenagers often faced bullying, and martial arts training could provide both the skills and confidence needed to handle such situations. However, she also understood the serious legal and social implications of using their training outside the academy. "Tell me about it," Master Rodriguez said, settling into one of the plastic chairs that lined the edge of the training area. Madison described the honey incident and the subsequent escalations, keeping her account factual and unemotional. She explained Tyler's pattern of behavior, his apparent frustration with her lack of reaction, and her growing sense that the situation was building toward something more serious. Master Rodriguez listened without interruption, occasionally asking clarifying questions about specific incidents or Madison's responses. As an experienced instructor, she understood that Madison's analytical approach to the problem was both a strength and a potential weakness. The girl was thinking strategically, but she might be overcomplicating a situation that could be resolved through school administration or parental intervention. "Have you considered involving adults at school?" Master Rodriguez asked. "Teachers, counselors, administrators?" Madison had considered it, but her assessment was that such involvement would likely escalate the situation without resolving it. Tyler's family had significant influence in the community, and his behavior had been carefully calculated to avoid clear violations of school policies. The honey incident, while humiliating, could be dismissed as a prank. The physics lab accident was exactly that, an accident with witnesses who would support Tyler's version of events. "I think it would make things worse," Madison said. "And I don't want to be seen as someone who can't handle her own problems." Master Rodriguez understood the sentiment, but she also recognized the danger in Madison's reasoning. The girl was preparing for physical confrontation when other solutions might still be available. However, she also knew that teenagers needed to feel some agency in resolving their own conflicts, and Madison's training had prepared her for situations where self-defense might become necessary. "If it comes to physical confrontation, Master," Rodriguez said carefully, "remember that the goal is to stop the threat, not to punish the person creating it. Use the minimum force necessary to protect yourself, and always look for opportunities to de-escalate." Madison nodded, understanding both the technical and philosophical aspects of her instructor's advice. Jiu-Jitsu had taught her that control was more important than dominance, that ending a conflict was preferable to winning it, and that the most skilled fighters were often those who avoided fighting altogether. Over the following days, Madison implemented a careful strategy of increased awareness and preparation. She varied her routes between classes, avoided isolated areas of the school, and positioned herself near exits whenever possible. She also began carrying herself differently: straighter posture, more confident movement, direct eye contact when challenged. These changes didn't go unnoticed by Tyler and his friends. Jessica mentioned to Connor that Madison seemed different lately, less vulnerable and more alert. Connor, who had been increasingly uncomfortable with their escalating behavior, suggested that maybe they should leave Madison alone and find other targets for their entertainment. But Tyler interpreted Madison's increased confidence as defiance, and defiance required correction. He began planning something more dramatic than honey or accidental spills, something that would definitively establish his dominance and break Madison's frustrating composure. The plan he developed involved public humiliation on a scale that would be impossible to ignore or dismiss. Tyler had noticed that Madison often spent lunch periods in the school library, where she could eat quietly while reading. The library was supervised by Mrs. Chen, an elderly volunteer who often dozed at her desk during lunch hours. It would be the perfect location for an incident that would be witnessed by other students, but not immediately stopped by adult intervention. Tyler's plan was more elaborate than his previous actions. He intended to trap Madison in the library's back section, where reference books were stored and students rarely ventured. Jessica would create a distraction at the front of the library while Connor blocked the main exit. Tyler would then confront Madison directly, escalating the situation until she either fought back or broke down completely. The plan relied on Madison's predictable routine and her tendency to avoid confrontation. Tyler was confident that cornering her in a confined space would finally provoke the reaction he'd been seeking, either through tears and submission or through futile resistance that would justify more aggressive retaliation. What Tyler didn't account for was Madison's own strategic thinking. She had noticed the increased attention from all three bullies, the way they seemed to be coordinating their movements around her schedule, and the particular interest Tyler showed in her library visits. Her training had taught her to recognize when someone was studying her patterns, and she understood that a confrontation was approaching. Madison began making subtle changes to her routine. She started eating lunch in different locations, sometimes the art room, sometimes an empty classroom, sometimes outside on the school's small patio. When she did use the library, she chose seats with better sight lines and multiple exit routes. She also began carrying her backpack differently, adjusting the strap so she could remove it quickly if needed. Most importantly, Madison began mentally rehearsing scenarios. During her evening training sessions, she would visualize potential confrontations in school settings, narrow hallways, crowded cafeterias, confined spaces like the library. She practiced techniques that would be effective in these environments, focusing on methods that would allow her to escape rather than dominate. Master Rodriguez noticed Madison's increased focus on practical scenarios and adjusted her training accordingly. Without explicitly acknowledging the school situation, she began incorporating more realistic drills into their sessions. They practiced techniques for dealing with multiple attackers, methods for fighting in confined spaces, and strategies for creating escape opportunities. "Remember," Master Rodriguez said during one particularly intense session, "your goal is always to go home safe. Don't get caught up in proving anything to anyone. If you can walk away, walk away. If you can't walk away, do what you need to do to create the opportunity to walk away." Madison absorbed this advice along with the technical instruction, understanding that her instructor was preparing her for the possibility that avoidance might not be sufficient. The realization was both empowering and sobering. She had the skills to protect herself, but using those skills would change everything about her carefully maintained invisibility. The final escalation began on a Tuesday afternoon in late October. Madison had been varying her lunch routine for 2 weeks, successfully avoiding the confrontation Tyler was planning. Frustrated by her unpredictability, Tyler decided to force the issue by having Jessica approach Madison directly during their shared English class. "Madison," Jessica said, sliding into the seat next to her before class began. "I wanted to apologize for what happened to the honey. That was really mean, and I felt bad about it." Madison looked at Jessica with the same analytical attention. She gave to complex jiu-jitsu positions. The apology sounded rehearsed, and Jessica's body language suggested nervousness rather than genuine remorse. More importantly, Jessica had never spoken to Madison directly before, which made the sudden friendly overture suspicious. "Thank you," Madison replied neutrally, offering no additional comment or invitation for further conversation. Jessica had been prepared for this response. Tyler had coached her to expect Madison's reserve and had given her specific talking points to continue the conversation. "I was wondering if you'd like to eat lunch with us today. As a way of making up for what happened." The invitation was so obviously a trap that Madison almost admired its transparency. Tyler was abandoning subtlety in favor of direct manipulation, trying to lure her into a controlled environment where he could orchestrate whatever humiliation he had planned. "I appreciate the offer," Madison said, "but I prefer eating alone." Jessica persisted, following Tyler's script. "Come on, it would be fun. We could sit in the library where it's quiet. I know you like it there." The specific mention of the library confirmed Madison's suspicions about Tyler's planning. He had been studying her routine carefully enough to know her preferred lunch locations, and he was using Jessica to guide her toward a predetermined confrontation site. "I have plans already," Madison said, turning her attention to the English assignment on her desk. Jessica tried once more, with less conviction than before. "Maybe another time?" Madison didn't respond, and Jessica retreated to her usual seat as other students began arriving for class. Throughout the period, Madison was aware of Jessica sending text messages, presumably updating Tyler on the failed recruitment attempt. After class, Madison observed Tyler's group more carefully than usual. She noticed Connor hanging back in hallways, positioning himself between her and potential exit routes. She saw Jessica loitering near the library entrance during lunch period, despite having no apparent reason to be there. Most significantly, she noticed Tyler himself becoming more aggressive in his general behavior, as if working up to something bigger. The pattern was clear. They were preparing for a confrontation, regardless of whether Madison cooperated with their plans. Tyler's frustration with her continued resistance was reaching a breaking point, and he was moving toward more direct action. That afternoon, Madison made a decision that would prove crucial to everything that followed. Instead of going directly to her jiu-jitsu training session, she stopped at home and had a conversation with her parents about the escalating situation at school. Her father, David Chun, listened to her account with the professional attention of someone trained in security assessment. He asked specific questions about the incidents, the timing, and the behavioral patterns Madison had observed. When she finished, he was quiet for several minutes before responding. "You've been handling this well," he said finally. "But it sounds like these kids are building up to something more serious. Have you considered involving the school administration?" Madison explained her reasoning for avoiding official intervention, including her assessment that Tyler's family connections would likely protect him from significant consequences. Her father understood the political realities of small-town social dynamics, but he also recognized the danger in allowing the situation to escalate without adult oversight. "I want you to document everything," he said. "Dates, times, witnesses, specific incidents. If this gets worse, we'll need evidence." Madison agreed, though she suspected that by the time documentation became relevant, the immediate crisis would already be resolved one way or another. Her mother, Sarah Chun, approached the situation from a different angle. As a pediatric nurse, she had seen the long-term effects of bullying on young people, and she was concerned about both Madison's immediate safety and her emotional well-being. "I'm proud of how you're handling this," Sarah said, "but I don't want you to feel like you have to face this alone. We're here to support you, whatever you decide to do." Madison appreciated her parents' support, but she also understood that the ultimate confrontation would happen when adults weren't present to intervene. Tyler had been careful to orchestrate his harassment during times and places where authority figures were absent or distracted. The final escalation would likely follow the same pattern. That evening's training session was different from Madison's usual practice. Master Rodriguez had arranged for her to spar with several advanced students, including a few who significantly outweighed her. The scenarios were more intense than normal, focusing on situations where Madison would need to use technique and leverage to overcome physical disadvantages. During one particularly challenging round, Madison found herself defending against a much larger opponent who was using his weight and strength to dominate positions. Instead of becoming frustrated or abandoning her technique, she remained calm and methodical, eventually finding an opening that allowed her to secure a rear naked choke. "Good," Master Rodriguez said as Madison released the submission. "Remember that feeling when someone tries to use their size against you. Stay calm and look for opportunities. Size advantage only works if the smaller person panics." Madison nodded, understanding that the lesson extended beyond sparring scenarios. Tyler's psychological harassment was similar to a larger opponent's physical pressure, intimidating and potentially overwhelming, but ultimately defeatable through patience and proper technique. As she prepared to leave the academy that evening, Madison felt a sense of resolution settling over her. The escalating situation at school was approaching its climax, and she was as prepared as she could be for whatever form that climax might take. Walking to her car, Madison reflected on the path that had brought her to this point. A year ago, she had been completely invisible at Lincoln Valley High, moving through her days without attracting attention or creating conflict. The honey incident had changed that dynamic permanently, forcing her into a situation where invisibility was no longer possible, but perhaps that change wasn't entirely negative. Madison had discovered reserves of strength and confidence she hadn't known she possessed. Her training had evolved from a private hobby into a practical skill set. Most importantly, she had learned that sometimes the choice wasn't between fighting and avoiding conflict. Sometimes the choice was between different kinds of fighting. The next morning, Madison arrived at school with a heightened sense of awareness and purpose. She had moved beyond hope that Tyler would lose interest or that the situation would resolve itself naturally. Instead, she was prepared for the confrontation that seemed increasingly inevitable. Tyler, Jessica, and Connor were also prepared. Their planning had reached its final stage, and they were ready to implement the most ambitious harassment scheme they had yet attempted. The location was chosen, the timing was set, and the outcome they expected was clear in their minds. What none of them anticipated was how thoroughly Madison had prepared for this moment, or how dramatically the encounter would differ from their expectations. The quiet girl who had endured months of escalating harassment was about to demonstrate that there was a significant difference between choosing not to fight and being unable to fight. The final confrontation was now less than 24 hours away. Wednesday morning brought an unusual energy to Lincoln Valley High. Students moved through the hallways with an undercurrent of anticipation, as if sensing that something significant was about to happen. Rumors had been circulating about an impending confrontation between Madison Chen and Tyler Brooks' group, fueled by witnesses to their recent interactions and the obvious tension that had been building for weeks. Madison felt the shift in atmosphere immediately upon entering the building. Conversations stopped when she passed, only to resume in hushed whispers once she moved on. Students who had never acknowledged her existence now watched her movements with keen interest. The invisible girl had become the center of attention. She had spent years avoiding. Tyler reveled in the buzz surrounding their conflict. He had carefully cultivated this moment, transforming what had begun as casual bullying into a public spectacle. Students were choosing sides, placing informal bets on the outcome, and speculating about when and where the confrontation would occur. For Tyler, this attention validated his status as someone whose actions mattered enough to generate school-wide interest. Jessica felt increasingly uncomfortable with the situation's trajectory. What had started as supporting her boyfriend's dominance games had evolved into something that felt dangerous and unpredictable. She noticed how other students looked at their group, now some with admiration, others with disgust, but all with an intensity that suggested serious consequences would follow whatever happened next. Connor's discomfort had progressed to outright anxiety. He had participated in Tyler's schemes for years, but always with the understanding that their actions would have limited consequences. The current situation felt different, more volatile, and Connor was beginning to question whether his loyalty to Tyler was worth the potential fallout from their planned confrontation. The plan Tyler had developed was his most elaborate yet. He intended to corner Madison in the school's East Wing during the final period of the day, when most teachers would be in faculty meetings and student supervision would be minimal. Connor would create a distraction by triggering the fire alarm in the West Wing, drawing administrative attention away from their target area. Jessica would ensure that the confrontation was recorded for social media distribution, capturing Madison's humiliation for permanent documentation. Tyler himself would handle the direct confrontation, using a combination of physical intimidation and psychological pressure to break Madison's composure. He had prepared specific insults targeting her family, her appearance, and her social isolation. If verbal assault proved insufficient, he was prepared to escalate to physical harassment, confident that Madison would either submit or provide justification for more aggressive retaliation. The plan's success depended on Madison following her predictable routine and being caught off guard by their coordinated assault. Tyler was confident in his strategy because it had worked against other targets in the past, and Madison had shown no indication that she was prepared for serious confrontation. But Madison's apparent predictability was actually calculated misdirection. She had been varying her actual routine while maintaining the appearance of consistency, creating opportunities to observe Tyler's group while they studied her patterns. Her real schedule bore little resemblance to what Tyler believed it to be. More importantly, Madison had been preparing for this confrontation with the same methodical approach she applied to her Jiu-Jitsu training. She had identified the most likely locations for Tyler's planned encounter, analyzed the tactical advantages and disadvantages of each space, and developed response strategies for different scenarios. During her morning classes, Madison executed the final phase of her own preparation. She sent carefully worded text messages to her parents, informing them that she might be late coming home due to school activities. She arranged her backpack to allow quick access to her phone for emergency calls. Most significantly, she chose her clothing strategically comfortable shoes for movement, fitted shirts that wouldn't interfere with defensive techniques, and jeans that would allow full range of motion. Her physics teacher, Mr. Davidson, noticed Madison's heightened alertness during the third period. She sat closer to the door than usual, kept her backpack within easy reach, and seemed to be monitoring the classroom entrance more than focusing on the lesson. When he called on her to answer a question about momentum and force, her response was technically correct, but delivered with an intensity that suggested her mind was applying the concepts to non-academic scenarios. Force equals mass times acceleration, Madison said, making eye contact with Tyler, who sat 3 rows behind her. But the effective application of force depends on leverage, timing, and the ability to redirect rather than absorb impact. Mr. Davidson accepted her answer, though he sensed she was communicating something beyond the physics lesson. Tyler heard the response differently, interpreting it as Madison's attempt to intimidate him with academic superiority. Her calm delivery and direct eye contact only reinforced his determination to break her composure that afternoon. During lunch period, Madison made a decision that would prove crucial to the day's outcome. Instead of eating in her usual locations, she went to the guidance counselor's office and requested a brief meeting with Mrs. Patterson, the school nurse who had helped her after the honey incident. "I wanted to thank you again for your help last week," Madison said. "And I wanted you to know that I might need to defend myself soon if the situation escalates." Mrs. Patterson understood the implications immediately. She had been monitoring the situation since the honey incident and had noticed the increasing tension between Madison and Tyler's group. As a mandated reporter, she was required to document threats of violence, but Madison's careful phrasing skirted the edge of that requirement. "Have you considered involving your parents or the administration?" Mrs. Patterson asked. Madison explained her reasoning for handling the situation privately, emphasizing her preference for resolving conflicts without adult intervention when possible. Mrs. Patterson appreciated the girl's maturity, but worried about the potential consequences of allowing the situation to escalate without official oversight. "I want you to know that my office is always available if you need help," Mrs. Patterson said. "And I want you to promise me that you'll seek adult assistance if you feel unsafe." Madison promised to call for help if the situation exceeded her ability to handle it safely, though she privately doubted that adult intervention would be possible during the actual confrontation. Tyler had been too careful in his planning to allow for easy interruption by authority figures. The final period of the day arrived with palpable tension throughout the school. Students moved through hallways with unusual energy, many positioning themselves to witness whatever was about to happen. Social media buzzed with speculation and anticipation, creating a digital audience for the physical confrontation. Tyler implemented his plan with military precision. At exactly 2:45 p.m., Connor excused himself from the study hall and made his way to the West Wing's fire alarm system. Jessica positioned herself near the East Wing entrance with her phone ready to record. Tyler himself moved toward Madison's expected location, confident that his months of planning were about to reach their satisfying conclusion. But Madison wasn't where Tyler expected to find her. Instead of following her apparent routine, she had positioned herself in the school's main hallway, where student traffic and adult supervision made confrontation unlikely. From this central location, she could observe Tyler's movements while maintaining tactical advantages. Tyler's frustration mounted as he searched the East Wing without finding his target. His carefully orchestrated plan was failing at the most basic level. Madison wasn't cooperating with his script. Connor had already triggered the fire alarm, creating the distraction they needed. But their primary objective remained elusive. Jessica spotted Madison first, noting her position in the main hallway where Tyler's preferred confrontation style would be impossible. She texted Tyler with Madison's location, but also included a suggestion that they abort the plan and try again another day. Tyler ignored Jessica's caution. His investment in this confrontation was too significant to abandon. Due to tactical inconvenience, he decided to force the encounter regardless of location, believing that his size advantage and psychological pressure would overcome any environmental disadvantages. As Tyler approached Madison in the main hallway, other students began gathering at a respectful distance. The fire alarm in the West Wing had been quickly identified as false, but it had succeeded in drawing some administrative attention away from this central area. The timing was imperfect for Tyler's original plan, but still workable for his modified approach. Madison saw Tyler coming long before he reached her. She had been tracking his movements through reflections in display case glass and the positioning of other students who were watching the unfolding drama. Her breathing remained steady, her posture relaxed but alert, her mind clear and focused. On the technique she had practiced thousands of times, Tyler stopped 3 feet away from Madison, close enough to intimidate, but far enough to avoid immediate physical contact. He began with the verbal assault he had rehearsed, targeting her appearance, her family, and her social isolation with calculated cruelty. "You think you're better than everyone else, don't you?" Tyler said, his voice carrying clearly through the hallway. "Walking around like you're too good to talk to people, like we're all beneath you." Madison didn't respond, maintaining the same calm expression that had frustrated Tyler for months. Her silence only amplified his aggression, confirming his belief that she was afraid and hoping to avoid confrontation through passive resistance. "I'm talking to you," Tyler said, stepping closer. "The least you could do is answer when someone's being friendly." Still no response from Madison, though students gathering around them could see that her posture had shifted slightly. She stood, more centered, her weight distributed evenly, her hands relaxed but ready. To most observers, she appeared calm to the point of indifference. But those with martial arts experience might have recognized the subtle signs of someone preparing for action. Tyler's frustration reached its breaking point. The public setting meant he couldn't implement his original plan, but it also meant that backing down would be witnessed by dozens of students. His reputation required follow-through, regardless of tactical considerations. "You know what?" Tyler said, moving within arm's reach of Madison. "I think you need another reminder about showing respect." He reached toward Madison's shoulder, intending to push her backward into the lockers behind her. It was meant to be the opening move of a physical confrontation that would end with Madison's submission and his reaffirmation of dominance. But Tyler's hand never reached its target. Madison moved with fluid precision, her 6 years of Jiu-Jitsu training translating into action faster than Tyler could process. She stepped slightly to the side, redirecting his forward momentum while simultaneously grabbing his extended wrist. In one continuous motion, she pulled him off balance and stepped behind him, her arms sliding around his neck in a rear naked choke. The technique was textbook perfect, one arm across Tyler's throat, the other behind his head, her body position, controlling his movement while cutting off blood flow to his brain. Tyler had approximately 10 seconds before unconsciousness, though his panic made it feel much shorter. Jessica screamed Tyler's name and started forward, but Connor grabbed her arm, recognizing that intervention would only make the situation worse. Other students backed away, shocked by the sudden reversal of what they had expected to be Madison's humiliation. Tyler clawed at Madison's arm, trying to break the choke, but his technique was non-existent and his position was hopeless. Madison maintained perfect control, applying just enough pressure to subdue him without causing permanent damage. Her face remained calm, almost serene. As Tyler's struggles weakened and his body went limp, the entire encounter lasted less than 15 seconds from Tyler's first aggressive move to his unconsciousness. Madison lowered his unconscious form to the floor carefully, ensuring he wouldn't be injured by the fall, then stepped back and waited for the inevitable adult intervention. Hallway erupted in chaos as students pulled out phones to record the aftermath and teachers came running in response to the commotion. But Madison stood quietly in the center of it all, her breathing steady, her expression unchanged, as if nothing particularly remarkable had just occurred. Tyler's reign of terror had ended not with a dramatic battle, but with the clinical application of technique by someone who had been preparing for this moment far longer than anyone realized. Tyler Brooks awakened on the cold linoleum floor of Lincoln Valley High's main hallway, surrounded by a circle of concerned faces and the harsh fluorescent lighting that suddenly seemed too bright. His head throbbed, his throat felt raw, and for several disorienting seconds, he couldn't remember where he was or what had happened. The last clear memory he had was reaching toward Madison Chun, intending to push her against the lockers. "Tyler, can you hear me?" Mrs. Patterson's voice came from somewhere above him. The school nurse was kneeling beside him, checking his pulse and examining his pupils for signs of concussion. "You lost consciousness for about 2 minutes. I need you to stay still while we make sure you're okay." As awareness returned, Tyler became conscious of the dozens of students watching him from a respectful distance. Their expressions ranged from shock to fascination to barely concealed amusement. The realization that he had been rendered unconscious in front of half the school sent a wave of humiliation through him that was far more painful than any physical discomfort. Madison stood about 10 feet away, flanked by Principal Martinez and Assistant Principal Johnson. She appeared completely calm, her hands clasped behind her back, her posture respectful but not submissive. When Tyler's eyes found hers, she met his gaze steadily, without triumph or malice, but with a quiet confidence that he had never seen from her before. "What happened here?" Principal Martinez asked the gathered students, though the question was largely rhetorical. Multiple phone cameras had captured the entire encounter, and the videos were already circulating through social media with alarming speed. Jessica Martinez stepped forward, her voice shaky with emotion. Tyler was just talking to her, and she attacked him. She could have killed him. Her protest sounded hollow even to her own ears, undermined by the video evidence that clearly showed Tyler initiating physical contact. Connor Walsh remained silent, staring at Tyler's prone form with a mixture of concern and dawning realization. The invincible leader he had followed for years had been defeated by the quietest girl in school using techniques Connor didn't even know existed. The social hierarchy that had defined his high school experience had just been fundamentally altered. As Tyler was helped to his feet by Mrs. Patterson and escorted toward the nurse's office, Madison was led to the principal's office for questioning. The hallway slowly emptied as teachers dispersed the crowd of students, but the energy of what had just occurred continued to ripple through the school like an earthquake's aftershocks. In Principal Martinez's office, Madison sat across from the desk with her hands folded in her lap, waiting patiently as the administrator reviewed the multiple video recordings that students had already submitted. The footage was remarkably consistent. Tyler approaching Madison aggressively, reaching toward her with clear intent to make physical contact, and Madison responding with what appeared to be a defensive technique that resulted in Tyler's immediate incapacitation. "Madison," Principal Martinez began carefully, "I need you to explain exactly what happened from your perspective." Madison's account was precise and factual. She described Tyler's verbal harassment, his threatening approach, his attempt to make physical contact, and her response using what she termed defensive techniques she had learned in martial arts training. She spoke without emotion, presenting the facts as if she were describing a laboratory experiment rather than a physical confrontation. "Have you been anticipating this kind of situation?" the principal asked, noting the calculated nature of Madison's response. "I've been aware that Tyler's behavior was escalating," Madison replied. "I hoped it wouldn't come to physical confrontation, but I prepared for that possibility." Principal Martinez found herself in an unusual position. The video evidence clearly showed Madison acting in self-defense against Tyler's aggression. However, the sophistication of her response and the severity of the outcome raised questions about proportionality and premeditation that complicated the school's disciplinary response. Meanwhile, in the nurse's office, Tyler was undergoing evaluation for possible concussion and other injuries. Mrs. Patterson had called his parents and recommended that he be taken to the hospital for a more comprehensive examination. Though his vital signs appeared stable and he was answering questions coherently, Tyler's father, Robert Brooks, arrived at the school within 30 minutes of the phone call. A successful businessman accustomed to solving problems through influence and intimidation, he was unprepared for a situation where his son was clearly the aggressor, and the evidence was documented beyond dispute. "This is completely unacceptable," Robert Brooks declared to Principal Martinez. "That girl attacked my son with some kind of martial arts move. She could have killed him. This is assault, and I want her arrested." Principal Martinez had dealt with aggressive parents before, but the current situation was complicated by the clear video evidence of Tyler's aggressive behavior and Madison's defensive response. "Mr. Brooks, I understand your concern for Tyler's welfare, but the evidence shows that Madison was defending herself against your son's physical aggression." The conversation became heated as Robert Brooks demanded Madison's expulsion and threatened legal action against the school district. However, his position was undermined by the mounting evidence of Tyler's pattern of harassment, including testimonies from students who had witnessed the honey incident and other forms of bullying behavior. Madison's parents arrived at the school an hour later, having been contacted by the administration. David Chun's security background had prepared him for situations involving conflict and liability, and he approached the meeting with calm professionalism. Sarah Chun's medical experience helped her understand the seriousness of Tyler's injuries and the potential legal implications of Madison's actions. "We're proud of Madison for defending herself," David Chun stated clearly during the meeting with school administrators. "But we're also concerned about the safety of all students involved." This situation escalated because previous incidents weren't addressed appropriately. The investigation that followed revealed the full scope of Tyler's harassment campaign against Madison. Students who had previously been afraid to speak up began providing testimonies about incidents they had witnessed. The honey attack, the physics lab incident, and numerous other examples of bullying behavior created a comprehensive picture of sustained harassment that had been allowed to escalate unchecked. Jessica Martinez and Connor Walsh were called in for separate interviews about their roles in the harassment campaign. Jessica broke down during questioning, admitting to her participation in the honey incident and revealing details about Tyler's planning for the confrontation. Connor provided similar testimony, expressing remorse for his involvement and relief that the pattern of behavior had finally been stopped. The legal implications of the incident proved complex. While Tyler's parents initially threatened to press assault charges against Madison, their attorney advised them that her actions clearly constituted self-defense under state law. More problematically for the Brooks family, Madison's parents were considering their own legal action for the sustained harassment campaign that had led to the confrontation. The school district's investigation concluded that Madison had acted appropriately in defending herself against physical aggression. No disciplinary action was taken against her, though she was required to participate in conflict resolution counseling to ensure she had appropriate support systems for handling future situations. Tyler faced a 3-day suspension for aggressive behavior and harassment. More significantly, he was removed from the football team and required to complete anger management counseling before being allowed to return to normal school activities. The incident report would become part of his permanent record, potentially affecting college applications and scholarship opportunities. Jessica and Connor received 1-day suspensions for their roles in the harassment campaign and were required to complete community service projects focused on anti-bullying initiatives. Both were also banned from participating in homecoming activities, a social consequence that carried significant weight in their peer group. The immediate aftermath of the confrontation was only the beginning of larger changes at Lincoln Valley High. The incident had been captured on multiple phones and had spread rapidly through social media, attracting attention far beyond the school community. Local news outlets picked up the story, framing it as an example of both bullying consequences and effective self-defense. Madison found herself thrust into a spotlight she had never sought. Students who had ignored her for years suddenly wanted to be her friend. Teachers looked at her with new respect. Younger students began approaching her for advice about handling their own bullying situations. The attention was overwhelming for someone who had spent years perfecting the art of invisibility. Madison handled the newfound recognition with the same calm composure she had shown during the confrontation, But privately she struggled with the loss of anonymity that had been her protective shield. Master Rodriguez watched the media coverage with mixed feelings. She was proud of Madison's technical execution and restraint under pressure, but she was also concerned about the potential impact on her students' development. The academy began receiving inquiries from parents wanting to enroll their children in self-defense classes, turning Madison's training into an inadvertent marketing success. "You did exactly what you needed to do," Master Rodriguez told Madison during their next training session. "But remember that this was about stopping a threat, not about proving anything to anyone. Don't let other people's reactions change who you are." Madison appreciated her instructor's guidance, especially as she navigated the complex social dynamics that followed the incident. Some students viewed her as a hero who had stood up to Lincoln Valley High's most notorious bully. Others saw her as someone to be feared, capable of violence that had previously been hidden beneath her quiet exterior. Tyler's recovery from the incident was both physical and psychological. While he suffered no permanent injuries from the chokehold, his social status had been fundamentally altered. Students who had once sought his approval now whispered about his humiliating defeat. His girlfriend had broken up with him, and his closest friend had begun distancing himself from their previous activities. The experience forced Tyler to confront aspects of his personality and behavior that he had never seriously examined. Required counseling sessions with the school psychologist helped him understand the impact of his actions on others and develop healthier ways of relating to his peers. Connor Walsh's transformation was perhaps the most dramatic of all. Freed from Tyler's influence, he began forming friendships based on shared interests rather than social hierarchy. He joined the school's robotics club and discovered an aptitude for engineering that had been suppressed by his focus on maintaining his position in Tyler's social circle. Jessica Martinez struggled more with the aftermath, finding herself caught between loyalty to Tyler and recognition of his harmful behavior. Her parents enrolled her in therapy to help process her role in the harassment campaign and develop stronger personal boundaries. The incident became a catalyst for broader discussions about bullying prevention at Lincoln Valley High. The administration implemented new policies for reporting and addressing harassment, including anonymous reporting systems and mandatory training for staff members. Madison's academic performance remained excellent throughout the controversy, though she found herself spending more time in guidance counseling sessions and peer mediation meetings. College recruiters who learned about the incident were generally impressed by her composure and self-defense skills, viewing them as evidence of character and leadership potential. As the school year progressed, the immediate drama of the confrontation faded into school legend, but its impact continued to resonate. Madison gradually returned to her preferred level of privacy, though she could never again achieve complete invisibility. Her reputation as someone who wouldn't tolerate harassment preceded her, creating a protective buffer that allowed her to focus on her studies and training. The Honey incident and its aftermath taught Lincoln Valley High that quiet students weren't necessarily vulnerable students, that years of martial arts training could remain hidden until needed, and that sometimes the most dramatic changes in social dynamics came from the most unexpected sources. For Madison Chun, the experience reinforced lessons her training had already taught her about patience, preparation, and the importance of responding appropriately to threats. She had never wanted to be the center of attention, but when circumstances forced her into the spotlight, she handled it with the same calm competence she brought to everything else in her life. The final lesson of the incident was perhaps the most important. Strength doesn't always announce itself with volume and aggression. Sometimes the quietest people carry the loudest courage, and sometimes the most effective response to harassment is the one that nobody sees coming until it's too late to prevent. Tyler Brooks learned this lesson the hard way, but he learned it thoroughly. And for Madison Chun, the girl who had honey removed from her hair and humiliation converted into empowerment, The incident marked not an end to her invisibility, but the beginning of a new kind of strength that came from knowing she could protect herself when protection became necessary. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.